But let's start the day with that Creagh story. It's one of our great trading partners and funders of our infrastructure and commodities projects. And it has a demography that's almost the exact opposite of our own. Its population, as I said, is projected to fall very quickly. And it has a glut of housing, as Ed Boyd discovered on a recent trip to Creagh as a guest of the Walkley Foundation.
In South Korea, giant apartment blocks are everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in the heart of Seoul or out in the regions. The countless rows of apartments seem to disappear into the distance. Roughly 63% of total homes in Korea are apartments. Unlike Australia, which has too little housing, the problem in Korea is there are too many apartments.
Well, of course, they're very different to us. They've got an ageing population. They don't have immigration, and of course these big chaebols, these big companies got into the housing market and built and built and built, a bit like in China as well. But declining population, no immigration, you're going to have a lot of spare apartments on your hands.
For Korea, this is a crisis. It has the lowest fertility rate in the world. The number of babies expected per woman was just 0.78 last year, well below the OECD average of 1.59. This is expected to reduce the population from about 51 million today to just 38 million by 2070. The problem is bad. The Korean government gives families with a newborn $340 a month for the first year of the child's life. This allowance will increase to $1,130 a month next year.
They've got an oversupply of housing, even though they're very densely populated in a small landmass. And also in terms of skills, everyone in Korea wants to be a doctor and a lawyer. You can't get a plumber or construction worker, so there's also skill shortages.
Contrast this to Australia. Our population is expected to grow from 26 million today to about 28 million within 5 years, due to 1.5 million expected migrants and a fertility rate of 1.66 children per woman. By 2070, Australia's population is forecast to be more than 50 million, more than Korea. The problem here is a severe lack of housing.
So certainly capital city vacancy rates are at or close to record lows in every capital city around the country. And that does point to that chronic supply shortage in the rental market, whereby we really have this ongoing situation where demand to rent is strong and is outstripping the supply of available rentals. So that is one of those shortages. But also we have persistent or ongoing affordability issues in Australia. So we know that the supply of new homes hasn't kept up with demand, and as a result, housing in Australia is very expensive. And I mean, the only meaningful or the only sustainable long-run solution to affordability challenges is to build more of the right homes in the places where people want to live.
The lack of housing in Australia is causing rents to rise sharply and rental vacancies to fall to record lows. It's such a problem, the government announced stimulus packages in the budget to encourage more housing development. The problem is, build to rent doesn't provide any solutions here and now. It's a long-term prospect.
So certainly build to rent is going to be a very helpful addition to Australia's housing mix. It represents a very small part of the housing market at the moment, whereas, say, in the UK or the US, represents a far larger amount of the housing mix or housing stock. And certainly with net migration continuing to increase, and we know that recent arrivals to Australia are most likely to rent when they first arrive in the country. It's around 70% of recent migrants are typically renters. So certainly build to rent can play a very helpful addition to the long-term pool of available rentals.
In Korea, people either buy outright, rent, or select a uniquely Korean option, jeonsi. Jeonsi allows the tenant to pay the landlord a lump sum, usually between 50 to 70% of the apartment's value, which is then held by the landlord and invested by them for a 2-year period. The tenant then lives rent-free before receiving a full refund at the end of the contract. The average price of a jeonsi apartment contract in Seoul in January was about 300,000 Australian dollars. Here in South Korea, everywhere you look, there are massive apartment blocks, but the country's facing a challenge of oversupply. In December, there were about 68,000 units sitting unsold in the market, and that's causing local government areas and property developers to pause construction, stifling investment. According to the Korea Juang Daily, December was the first time in 7 years the number of unsold units exceeded 60,000. In February, Daewoo Engineering and Construction gave up its rights to build a high-rise building in Ulsan, the home of Hyundai, due to a lack of demand for housing. And the city of Daegu, a short distance away, is blocking housing construction altogether until the market improves. Professor Tim Harcourt from UTS says housing booms and gluts all form part of the economic cycle.
To some degree, it's part of the business cycle in construction, either getting ahead or in Creagh's case, or lagging in Australia's case. In Australia, our investment options are basically blue chips, resources and energy, or red bricks. And that's always the way it's been. While Korea's have these massive chaebols, doing everything from cars to gas to transport to housing. So very different economic structure.
As interest rates have risen, Australia's economy has slowed. In the December quarter, it gained just 0.5%. March quarter figures will be released next month and are expected to show further weakness. Like Australia, Korea is struggling. March quarter economic growth crept ahead just 0.3% after falling 0.4% in the final quarter last year. Korea's economy narrowly avoided a technical recession in the first quarter, but its growth outlook remains challenging. It all hinges on the semiconductor sector making a comeback. Right now, it's in the doldrums and it needs to get back on track to help boost Korea's economic growth. After boom conditions during 2020 and 2021, demand for semiconductors fell sharply in 2022 and has dropped ever since. According to the International Data Corporation, semiconductor demand is expected to slowly recover in the second half of this year. And that's good news for Korea's economy and its largest computer chip maker, Samsung.